All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Macro Perspective, and back again with our guest series here. And our guest today is Dr. Bugazia, and he is one of our physicians here at Cenegenics, and he is going to spend about an hour with us. Talk about age management medicine, and yeah. So, Dr. Bugazia, I'm gonna maybe let you introduce yourself to the audience today, because I will likely not do it as well as you give the elevator pitch of yourself.
Thank you, Marcus and Seamus. Awesome podcast. It's a pleasure to be on here. My background is in internal medicine. Um, I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin now. I work in the Cenegenics Houston office, so I'm between the two cities. This is the Milwaukee accent that you hear in here. So I actually grew up in Libya. And again, my background is medicine. I did an ICU fellowship in Cleveland Clinic. I'm interested in intensive care unit. Obviously, I've been an ICU physician for 10 years. And then I started, exploring other venues of medicine. The thing about ICU that actually linked me to healthy aging is the physiology, the endocrine component to it, especially taking care of very complex endocrine abnormalities. And the endocrine system is notoriously very difficult, and it needs a multidisciplinary approach. On top of that, the similarities between critical care or ICU and healthy aging is that I do not think anybody in the world can claim to be an expert in all venues and aspects of healthy aging just because it's so diverse. So, what I like about Cenegenics is that each one of the physicians and the healthcare coaches that I deal with has a different set of expertise and different specialization and an element of healthy aging. So I consider my expertise and specialization to be in endocrinology, physiology, and just being comfortable with taking care of complex situations that require a lot of putting a lot of data together. I like the novelty. I like the curiosity that comes with healthy aging. So by the time I decided to explore other venues outside of ICU, which is, I love ICU, I'm always going to do it, but you can only do so much of ICU. So when I started hearing about the healthy aging world through the chief medical officer, Dr. Rafat Fadul, pretty much, and that time he spoke to me about it, and simultaneously, I got a call from back home, and my mom's been having memory issues for a while. And her memory declined so fast in a matter of months. So again, being a physician and having my mom so far away, I kind of was a big hit on my mental health and psyche, and then took a lot of processing. And then going back, she was diagnosed with rapidly progressive frontotemporal dementia. And then looking back at it, I realized that actually when I was at the end of my medical school, she underwent an OB procedure or gynecological procedure, and they took off her ovaries without hormone replacement. And the fact that we do not have any family history of dementia in our family made me think that the most likely reason is the hormonal deficiency that she suffered from in a while. So I felt that was, I don't know if everybody believes in synchronicities. I'm one of these people. I believe that there's no coincidence, and I felt like these two events happening at the same time consolidated my calling into the practice.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, Seamus, you go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
No, thank you for sharing that. I think,
Of course.
being able to go through the system, but then have the system kind of fail you, and like you're learning that, and that synchronicity of it must have been tough. I mean, going through school, going through all this with your mom, I know that a lot of folks think of like dementia, Alzheimer's. This is like some of the bigger deaths now. I think it's like doubled in the last like 2 decades. Um, yeah, how did you come to that conclusion that like, okay, there's no health history, this is it right here? Where did you start following that path with your mom, if you don't mind me asking, Dr. Bugazia? You're like, this
So,
doesn't make
so
sense.
absolutely. So, as you guys know, as a medical student, medicine is a language, if you would. Like, if you learn French, for example, you learn the alphabet, and then you learn the language, and then you can analyze a philosophy book or a political conversation. Medicine is a language that you take 4 to 8 years to learn, and eventually you'll hope to use this language to analyze complex data. So when I was in medical school or graduating from medical school, that was at the end of the repercussions of the Women's Health Initiative, right? And people were freaking out about hormone replacement. On top of that, as a medical student, you need some training, and nobody has sufficient training to know everything about every single specialty in medicine. So for me, that was beyond my knowledge and my expertise, and I trusted the physicians, and I think that was a big mistake. On top of that, that was in Libyan. The medical knowledge is not as spread as it is now. Like now, you can ask ChatGPT about anything. That was not the case back in the day. So when my mom got the diagnosis, I was getting into the differentials, that a B12 deficiency, is that hypothyroidism, is that multiple strokes. So we got
Yeah.
her through $1 billion workup, and then I started looking into my family members. I traced my grandparents, everybody else in my family. Nobody in our family, extended family from both sides, had dementia.
Yeah.
My grandma just passed away, her mom, at 82, and she was sharp as a whistle. So the only thing that I could correlate it to was the ovarectomy, or the
Yeah.
removal of ovaries.
Yeah.
So I had to go back to the records, and I pulled all of the records. Of course, she could not remember, and I found out that she actually never gotten her hormones replaced. And I really think that's that's the culprit, because getting dementia in mid 60s, early 60s, with no family history and no structural brain disease is very unusual.
And they've tied a good amount of like cognitive health to estrogen levels, correct? Like especially like in
Absolutely, there's
yeah. I mean,
okay.
so I mean, I think the assumption there makes a ton of sense from obviously like your background and my limited knowledge of understanding. Like I know that like from I mean, just in a male, for example, I guess, which I'd be more familiar with, right? Testosterone and estradiol gets too high, but then you block it with like a anastrozole or something like that. And then if it gets too low, that men tend to complain about not having as much mental clarity as they might be getting with the therapy, or they just feel like their ability to control like rage or some of those things could be a result of estrogen being too low, or other type of things, right? Is pretty common as well if it's too low?
So yeah, hormonal health is definitely linked to cognitive health. It's linked to spiritual and emotional health. It's linked to mental health as well. And one of the interesting studies that were done, and I can share it, was that some crazy guy took some young males and blocked their intrinsic testosterone production, and then gave them testosterone with or without anastrozole. So he brought their testosterone to a certain level, and then they had them on zero estrogen or a reasonable amount of estrogen. And males who had low estrogen had problems with mental health. They had like fell down. They had problems with concentration, cognitive function. Interestingly, they gained fat around the midsection, and they had issues with bones as well. So, as you said, males need estrogen, and that's why when I talk to my patients, not to change the subject, but I never say the female hormone or the male hormone, because we know this is gibberish. We know that women in their premenopausal years have 10 times higher testosterone than estrogen in their bloodstream. And this is why we measure testosterone in nanograms per ml and progesterone picograms per deciliter in women. So even the unit measurement. So if you compare apples to apples, testosterone is 10 times higher than estrogen
Yeah.
in women.
That's such a great point, and like something to clarify. I love the language you're using there, like male, female hormones. It's like these are hormones that we all have, and to have that study to showcase the effect of these two sex hormones on the psyche is so powerful. I think that nowadays it's so accessible to understand hormones a little bit more. So people isolate these compounds, right, Dr. Bugazia, and they're like, all right, let's isolate this one thing, this testosterone or this estrogen, and let's modulate that, right? And when they modulate that, they don't realize all these other side effects. And with working with men and women, it's like, what happens? Yeah, is there brain fog? Are they having lower libido? Are they gaining body fat? What's going on with their bone mineral density? I think that's the beautiful thing that Cenegenics kind of does, is making sure that we hit all those data points, right? Like making sure that if we make one change, we have to understand all the biochemical processes along the way and not just make an adjustment. Can you kind of talk about that for the audience, of like, in terms of like what Cenegenics is doing, like how we're kind of aggregating a lot of this data? Because it's a lot of data when we're looking at someone, right? Because since we're kind of talking about patients now, like an example kind of patient, right?
All right. So I want to give a little bit of a, I want to take a step back, and I want to get into that. But when you talk to physicists and chemists, I mean, you read about quantum physics or complex organic chemistry. And if you talk to any physicist, they'll tell you that physics is easy, although we don't know 95% what the universe is, dark matter, dark energy. This is 95% of the universe. We're done with 5% that has us and the 50 billion year old universe and black holes and everything. So we know very little, but what we know is easy because it's so complex, but there are rules and guidelines that the universe follows, and they're very elegant. The problem with biology, and that's what makes it amazing, and that's why we still have jobs, and I think AI is going to take a while to take our jobs. It will eventually happen, but it's going to take a little bit, is that there's no A and B equals C. For example, when you make testosterone has to bind to the receptors. You have a certain amount of receptors, and then you have receptor sensitivity. And then once you do that, they get internalized into the cell and then into the nucleus, and then you get transcription. So you have some, mRNA synthesis. And then the testosterone goes to the organs, and organs have different sensitivities to them. So it's a very intricate problem, and the only rule in biology is that there are no rules. So that's why I notice a lot, especially when I see patients who have been in the healthy aging world before. And I feel like sometimes, not to speak negatively about anybody, but I feel like my clinic is like a botched clinic, like the plastic surgery clinics when they fix a lot of previous issues. So I get patients who I look at their notes, I look at their records. There's never a mention of any symptoms that they had before. The only mention is that testosterone was 600. What does testosterone 600 mean? Nothing, zero, nada, nil, right? So that's why medicine, the ABCs of medicines are the ABCs. The first thing you want to do is talk to the patient. It's very cliche. It's so, 1920s, but this is the most important thing because studies show that the patient will give you the diagnosis within the first 90 seconds. The average physician interrupts the patient in the first 10 to 12 seconds or something like that. So what I learned, and the best thing about concierge medicine and Cenegenics specifically, is that I have time with my patient. I see 2 patients per day. I never see more than 3 patients. So my patient has all of my time. So all I do is I just listen. And I can tell you 100% of the time, the patient will give me the diagnosis in the first 90 seconds. So once I look at the symptoms of hormonal deficiency or a suboptimal hormone level, and then I go to the wrist, which is the physical exam, the vitals, the metabolic panel. How's the glucose? How's the cholesterol? How are things else? How's the CBC? How are the kidneys and the liver? And then I look at the testosterone panel. I try not to, or the hormonal panel. I try not to, what's the word? I try not to convince or persuade myself one way or another before talking to the patient. So a testosterone level of 600 means nothing. And the problem is that a lot of times that's what people look at, and that's what patients look at. And a lot of time takes a lot of education and back and forth.
Well, we know that these levels, obviously, again, it's just a digit. It's a number that is trying to represent something at a snapshot in time, right? Like it's like you said, you have to be able to kind of look at things at more of a deeper level than just simply 600, like you said, even if that is like quote the middle of the range, right? And obviously I think the biggest thing is like optimizing hormone levels, optimizing all those things. Like you just said, it's like that's why we have the quality of life score, right? That's like one of the things that all of our patients fill out typically, so that you're able to kind of assess things from a subjective manner versus like just a pure objective lens. Because again, like can you actually identify like a receptor, like how turned on it is for somebody? Like, is that something that we even have access to yet?
I mean, it's doable in a lab, but I don't know if you can generalize this data. It's like it's doable, definitely, but it's
So you
hard to it's hard to generalize.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe that is part of the future, though, is like not only are you getting optimization in terms of that actual value getting to that upper range, right? Whatever that 1200 number is based on like the literature that Dr. Lake has talked about for years in like the physician training, because then beyond that, it doesn't really seem to have any sort of evidence. And that the I feel
He
like
has high testosterone. This guy has high testosterone. Whoever is screaming.
my son, I know. I'm trying. Hey! We're trying to do something here.
It's so
yeah,
cute. All right.
yeah. He's he's trying to last day before going back to school. Thank goodness. But this is the life we do. In the future, we'll have a studio, right, Seamus?
100%.
But no, I feel like you're saying that the biggest thing that we give our patients is time. And in the modern medical system, you get 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe, right, for people to try to come in and make assumptions. And if the previous person is not documenting things at a very high level with their notes, then you have to grasp at straws. And that's not something that really helps with the idea behind optimizing things. And I mean, that's why we have really made the effort of doing the guest series to talk about these things. And Dr. Martin, when we had him on, was describing a very similar thing, right? And there's not really like a cut and dry, easy solution. But I do think, like you just said, as AI gets better or lab panels get better, and we're able to look at like receptors or things that are, going to be the cutting edge, right? Like, how are people going to be able to again, use this new thing plus the old thing? There's so much to think about, and that's why like these conversations are so exciting, is that we're trying to use the evidence as best as we can given the current situations, right? Or the current amount of data, and quote unquote generalize, but also specialize it for that specific individual, which I think is, again, I think I've said this before, maybe not on one that was in the guest series. Like, when I started this job at 26, that sounds right, 25, 26, it was like right before that birthday. I didn't understand. Like, I didn't understand like what it is that we really do, right? I was like, oh, it's a job. I'm health coaching, right? Going on 6 years later, I'm like, oh, it's more than that. There's so many layers to these things that people really should get educated on, even if they're not someone that meets our demographic specifically.
Yeah.
Simply because what it allows them to do is start building up like your own personal, collection of data, right? Like, yes, people should go and maybe find a place to do a DEXA or do a pretty comprehensive lab panel and treat themselves to that, and start getting some data at an earlier level so that you can then be able to hopefully, again, if they come to us later in life, and again, this is also where we have those other offerings that we're trying to include for people, where you're getting some baseline sense of biomarkers, where then you can go in later on. Then it's like, oh, at 30, I did, a few different labs and it showed me here, and I've definitely seen a decline. Is that, again, is that just age? Is that the normal aging process? Is it because I'm not doing things well, right? Like, there's layers to it, right, Seamus? Like, I mean,
yeah.
Coming from the guy that's over there sends his labs to me yesterday and was like, what do you think of this? I was like, that's probably one of the highest testosterons I've seen naturally.
We called it Primo Labs.
Yeah.
I love that. Marcus, you mentioned Dr. Lake. Shout out to Dr. Lake. I mean, one of the greatest healthy aging physicians probably in the world, one of the finest. We're really lucky to have him. He's such an experience. But one of the things he talks about is and that links to the question that you had about testosterone receptors. We know that there's in the androgen receptor gene, there's a repetition of DNA base called CAG, which is, the DNA is A, C, G, and T. So if you have CAG repetitions, you have more sensitivity to testosterone. So that's something that can be easier done. And now a lot of the DNA analysis labs can check for the CAG polymorphism, they call it CAG polymorphism. And they look at how many repetitions you have and how sensitive you are. And that's another reason you notice that, some patients do fine with the lower testosterone. Others do not do as well with normal, quote unquote, normal levels. There's no such thing as normal. I don't like that word, but within therapeutic range levels. So I think DNA analysis is going to be part of the future in that sense.
It's going to be so sick. It's going to be, oh man, it's going to be so, I'm over here like my scientific brain going like, just getting jazzed up.
You're nerding out from yesterday's meeting, aren't you, Seamus? You can't wait till we actually fully launch that everywhere, so that it's like it's like a foreshadowing into what we can, just scraping the surface of what those type of sequencing can do.
It's a scraping of the surface, but I think it goes back to the practicality. Like I nerd about these things, and like obviously it's going to take some funding, people trying to push for that, finding the importance of that, but also back to like, okay, yes, we're doing the cutting edge, but what does that mean for like the person in the ICU? What does that mean for the person just in your day-to-day that even can't afford maybe some of the basic offerings? Maybe it's just like an emergency thing. Like, how does this all transfer back to the healthcare system model we have now in the United States, or Cenegenics model? I think it's very important. Dr. Bugazia, though, I got a question for you since we're talking about testosterone. I'm gonna ask this one. It's a little bit more personal, but I think since we're talking about testosterone, I think a lot of men will like this. I'll just say this freely because I'm comfortable to say it. I got a good T. Pretty high, pretty good naturally. But what if someone has great T, but their free T is bound? That free testosterone is bound. What are some kind of concepts that may be happening there for a person? Obviously, you don't have the labs in front of you, Dr. Bugazia, and you may not have other markers in front of you. Maybe it's SHBG or any other things that might be going on. But if you're just to think generally, like if a person, young, healthy, 30-year-old, has high good T, but his free T is bound up, what are some thoughts you might be having?
So hormones are very complicated because, as we spoke about, on top of the downstream effect of hormones, there's the hormone transport system, right? So in order for you to carry testosterone is not going to be, hovering around in the circulation. It has to be bound on something, and that's usually albumin and SHBG, which is the steroid hormone binding globulins, and that what delivers it to the tissue. But the body does not very effectively extract testosterone from the SHBG and the albumin, so you need the free moiety. So the question that you asked, which is really great, is if you have a great total testosterone, but your free one is low, what should we do about that? So I had a patient whose total is around 1,000, and the free was like 65, right? So what else are you going to need other than 1,000? And my answer is talk to the patient. ABCs of medicine. Do you have any symptoms? We have a mental domain, spiritual domain, physiologic domain, metabolic domain. So we have the different domains of testosterone deficiency, and then you look at the metabolic profile. You look at the DEXA scan, and then the sexual domain and sleep and everything that comes with testosterone deficiency, and see how the patient is doing. Now, the problem with given testosterone is that in order for you to drive the steroid hormone, the free testosterone up, that total testosterone is going to be so high, it's going to be way out of the physiologic range. So the other question we asked ourselves is there something that's driving the SHBG to a higher level? Do we have another endocrine abnormality? Sometimes high estrogen would do that. Sometimes thyroid issues would do that. Sometimes if you have issues with cortisol or maybe even growth hormone, what else has happened on the endocrine milieu that's affecting your steroid hormone binding globulin? And then you want to look at genetics too. And you want to look at how much sensitivity your end organs have to testosterone. So it's multifactorial. It's a very difficult question. I don't know. I don't think I have the answer for it, but
No,
I
I
can
no,
rule
I think
out a
that
few
is the
things.
answer. Yeah, I think that is the answer. That gives me everything I need to do on my end. I know Marcos and I are probably going to do after this podcast is because I do have my genomics, I do have my labs, and I have all those other components down that I can kind of put into a little extrapolated aggregate data and go, okay, this is the next steps I need to take in terms of, working on my free T. So that makes a lot of sense. It's crazy to think that one component, like you were just talking about, like, oh, my free T might be low. No, we got to look at this, we got to look at the receptor set. We got to look at the endocrine. We got to look at all these things before we make a decision. That's what I love about speaking with you, Dr. Bugazia, and working with you and all the other doctors. They're like, I think having a little bit more data, not trying to have testing anxiety, because that does happen with medical, right? But having enough testing to go, okay, this is how we're going to make a better decision. What pathway do we go down? Because if we test for these 4 other things, for this one specific thing, the free T, but we test these 4 other things, 3 of them show up negative, this one's positive, we work on that positive one. I love that, because then it's like, we're not making any guesses here. We're really trying to pinpoint that issue and work with the best we've got. That's what I love.
So thank you for that. So the thyroid has been much more extensively studied than the testosterone system, and we still have no idea how the thyroid system works, right? So, for example, the first rule of thyroid function is that anytime you admit somebody to the hospital, don't even check their thyroid function unless they have severe signs of hypothyroidism. The reason is, once you get admitted to the hospital, you're under stress, and there's something called euthyroid 6 syndrome, which is you have a normal thyroid, but now because of the change in homeostasis, your numbers are off. So unless you have florid hypothyroidism, we don't test it. If you don't have that, we test it, and you still don't like how the patient looks, you still check the thyroid function as an outpatient, right? A few problems. First, TSH ranges between 0.5 and 5. I mean, this is ridiculous. If you give me any test that has, the highest level is 100,000%, or sorry, 10,000% higher than the lowest level, 100 times more. This is really problematic. This means that it's very diverse. On top of that, TSH changes very fast. Like if you check it in the middle of the night, it's going to be higher than it is first thing in the morning. On top of that, you have T4 and T3 and reverse T3, right? So some patients, you start them on T4, and then they're like on cloud 9. They're having a good time. They're energized. They're happy. Some patients, they still tell you, I feel terrible. So you add T3 on top of that, right? And then what kind of thyroid do you? So it's just endocrinology. It's much complicated than a number. You have to look at 100 variables and come up with the best guess. Second point that I want to make is that everything you do carries a risk, including going to the grocery store to buy some vegetables because you can get hit by a car, especially in Milwaukee, right? So anything you do, you have to account for the risk, acknowledge the risk, and see how things go. A small example. Shimas, God forbid, you get a small infection or something like that, and you come to the ICU, the ED, and somebody gives you 10 liters of fluids, nothing's going to happen to you most likely, because you have a great cardiovascular physiology and you'll do fine, versus somebody who has heart failure or liver failure or something. Even 10 liters of fluid and you pretty much hurt them. So even fluids can hurt. So endocrinology is one of these specialties where you calculate the risk of missing the diagnosis versus the risk of omission versus risk of commission, right? Did I miss a diagnosis, or the patient didn't have disease and I treated them? And you have to weigh the risk versus benefit. I do not think there's any diagnosis in endocrinology that has 100% accuracy. So maybe a small trial of augmenting the testosterone and see how the patient feels, assuming the risk is low. And then if the patient doesn't improve, you get your answer.
Yeah. I love that.
I mean, this is why we didn't go to med school, right, Seamus? I mean, the complexities or the thought processes that have to go into just being able to understand how these things all potentially affect each other, and the potential overlapping that may or may not be in textbooks as of today. Like you just said, we've studied thyroid, more than the other hormones, and yet it still feels very incomplete and nuanced because of the range of the signaling hormone. So that's it. I mean, that's a crazy thing. And it's also, I think it's important to then also kind of point out that generally speaking, on a general follow-up lab that somebody might do with their PCP, they're only looking at the stimulating hormone, and you're barely scraping the surface of like the idea of the picture, because where you fall in that range, again, might be good for you, might be bad for you, and you need probably evidence of understanding where a person like kind of averages and trends. And that's where, again, where we have people generally drawing these markers, quarterly, twice a year, depending on where they're at in in their tenure with us, right? Like that's, in my eyes, like, again, going back to like 25-year-old 26-year-old Marcos was like, I don't see the importance of us doing all this so frequently. It seems like maybe it could be overkill, but also too, it's not, because you don't have a good historical reference of that person prior to coming in with us. And we're trying to like not only create that, but then also see how it's kind of fluctuated and, what intervention has led to what. For example, patient I saw yesterday has been with us for 16 years, 15 years. So a long period of time. So you get to just see this massive overview of all of these labs that have been, what is that, 60, at least 60 labs that have been drawn over the course of that, time. And so you can start making quick mathematical assumptions of averages when you see these things in a tabulated form, which is what I was kind of doing. Again, like I'm just like, okay, I'm going to try to get a consensus on what's been going on. I saw a pretty stark change in his A1C, so okay, was that, was there actual an intervention point? What was that thing? I obviously know what it actually is, not going to disclose that. But obviously then it's like, okay, we're leading to better overall health outcomes as a result of, that intervention. And I think that, again, like you just said, the nuances of all of it. And then, that's just one system, right? That's more of like the metabolism, so to speak, right? Like, and then how everything else coincides with one another. As obviously like what Seamus and I keep learning about as we bring on more and more physicians, like how your particular specialization opens up a different way of how you're going to try to solve this problem, right? This very complex problem of longevity and healthy aging. And I think that brings me to my next question, which is, in your eyes, like, what is ideal healthy aging look like?
So I want to start with your first point. I really appreciate your guys' presence and experience, and I can tell you a lot of times I feel like with any one of you who I worked with whom I worked, I feel like somebody's got my back, somebody's looking, and I have a second pair of eyes. The issue with clinics is that in a hospital, like in the ICU, there are like 20 people in rounds. Somebody's going to catch a mistake. But in the clinic, there's me and you guys. So it's awesome. Like your knowledge, the way you interpret labs, your experience, your understanding of physiology is really something that I really lean on and rely on. It's really exceptional. I can tell you a lot of times, one of the healthcare coaches with great knowledge, including both of you guys, came up to me and said, I think that, and that's why I like to talk to you always before speaking to the patient, because you come in, you're like, this is what I think and stuff. And I can tell you, you're right 99% of the time. So this is really awesome. When it comes to what would healthy aging, I mean, this can be a scientific question or a philosophical question. For me, healthy aging, I care personally, and this is my personal philosophy, I care more about my health span than lifespan. For me, what I define healthy aging by is continuing to do the things that I like to do until I'm dead. I have no issues with death, really. It's inevitable. It's going to happen to all of us. And I think I have a statue of Marcus Aurelius here, and one of the things that he always encourages is amor fati and memento mori, which is think about death all the time. And not to stray away from the subject, but I think one of the problems with the Western civilization in general is that we stopped talking about death. We're not allowed to talk about it. I love that. I love that. Amor
I'll
fati.
send it to you, Dr. Bugazia. I created this little thing. This is the memento mori, amor fati, but the 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom,
I love that.
justice, temperance, and courage. But yes.
I love that. And I have to send you a picture of the statue. I have the coins as well, but it's a great philosophy. Not perfect, but great. So when you look at um, we don't really talk about death. We don't even say somebody died. We say deceased, passed away. We're not allowed to see animals die, but we eat them and we throw them in the trash. The leftover meat, 40% of the meat gets thrown away after these poor animals get murdered. So what got us to that? We strayed away from the subject. So death is something that's not to sound morbid, but it's something good to speak about because death gives life value. It's the yin and yang, right? So for me, when I reach that phase, when I'm ready to die, I would like to be doing the things that I'm doing today, the things that I love. For people who are grandparents, you want to play with your grandchildren, you want to continue to walk, you want to go to travel, I have a patient who's building a star observatory in Texas, and he's actually now looking at the Andromeda galaxy. So these are things that I'm invested. I'm like, I want you to be alive until you take care of that, So this is the way they see healthy aging. It's being capable to do the things that you love in spite of the inevitable decay in your health that will happen with aging.
Yeah. I don't know which physician said this, Marcos, but Dr. Bugazia, one of the physicians said, I'd rather die on my sword at 75, living my best life, instead of being 50, diagnosed with something and living to 90 and having 40 years of dying, where, they're constantly just having to manage a disease risk or death pretty much for 40 years, where Marcus says it best, squaring that curve with your health span, where it's like you turn 75, you call it a day. You're like, peace out. And that was, it was not a long death. You kind of do. I think that's an important thing to kind of showcase, especially with the Cenegenics program, is that's what we share, promote, people living a lifestyle where they're doing the things that they love, whether it be, like you said, chasing a new project, right? Or being able to execute on their work or be there for the grandkids, play with them in a different way. I kind of feel the same way too. I feel like I'm 30 right now. Things are ramping up in my life in a certain way. I want to see certain things happen, but I don't need to live forever, right? I don't need to live forever. I need to do this now. And I think what Cenegenics helps with our patient base is people start realizing that at the later chapters of their life, there really isn't that much time left. How do I get the most amount of this time? And let's say if they're 55, they know that this next 30 years, with Cenegenics, every single day is capitalized, right? It's checking in with the health coach, checking in with the physician, making sure that labs are looking good, making sure that they're doing the physical things that they need to do just to enjoy their lifestyle, whether that's doing their VO2 max training, right? I know you and I had a conversation about this is the type of ventilation I want or type of DEXA scan. So it really does bring a major point of look, let's really have a conversation about health span more so than lifespan.
I go ahead, Marcus.
You
want to say something?
Yeah,
Can you take a quick pause? I just want to get a paper. We can edit this, right?
Yeah. You just go ahead.
I just want to get a piece of paper so that I can write down things. Just what?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Even the best, we always be taking notes. The name of the game is when you're having deep insight.
You guys are mentioning beautiful points, and I don't want to interrupt you at the same time. I don't want to lose my train of thought.
We go through that all the time.
So I wanted to talk about data, I wanted to talk about screening, and I wanted to talk about the decline with age. Okay, perfect. Go ahead, Marcus, please.
Oh,
perfect.
All right. So, I mean, the idea and that concept of death, this, as we're recording this actually today, one of the things I've been super passionate about for I mean, it's really got me started in health coaching altogether was CrossFit, and an athlete actually died in Texas today as a result of pursuing again, which is effectively maybe beyond quote unquote what you would do for health, but like I would much rather have that thing happen to me like that. I'm living my life to that fullest and living to my highest capacity as a human versus just like again being so crippled by anxiety as it relates to like health, you know what I mean? Or and that's something that my wife sometimes struggles with is like she's like, oh, my thyroid's bothering me today, I can feel my nodule a little bit more than others, what do you think it is? I was like, I don't know. Like I literally don't have any clue. I think it could be anything. It could be that maybe you're a little sick, maybe it's something else, maybe something scratched your throat, I don't, it is what it is. And you're right, like we don't ever, and maybe this is because I'm not like an overly spiritual individual personally. Like I've come to terms with like the idea of death at a much younger age, I feel like. And while it does quote unquote scare me, and it's something that obviously is inevitable, I worry about like the health of my parents as they are now rapidly approaching 70. They're going to be there, they're closer to that than they are 60, let's put it that way. And I'm like, man, like I want them to live the highest quality of life. And, I want health span right now. It's sometimes right as they're going through this transition into their later 60s, it feels like it's a little bit more of lifespan. There's a lot of things going on. They're like, what am I not doing to be able to help myself out? And in my head, I'm like, I mean, maybe there's a little bit of hormone optimization that's not happening for both of you. Like being completely like just transparent after seeing how everybody else comes into our, clinics and expresses how they're feeling and what they're doing and their vibrance and like, exuding quote unquote longevity. And I'm like, why am I not telling my parents to do something or get that like looked at this point? And again, as I say, I'm more afraid of them dying than I am myself, right? And if I have these tools, get in there. There are obviously what the specialists need to do, but also there's things maybe you could start doing for yourself. So when my dad gets back from New York, I'm like, I've told you about the things and maybe optimizing your hormones through another route besides just taking like, a supplemental version. Cause your sleep is still crap for whatever reason, even though your testosterone's come back higher, right? There's still other things that are going on that don't make a ton of sense. Maybe it is time to maybe step out the bounds of traditional medicine and meet with Dr. Makhtari, officially, like as a potential patient. So that's going to be a conversation, and it's all about the idea of that same thing, health span. And so I think we didn't have to bring that up to you. Like, and Seamus, that's definitely not my term. That was what Rudy said. That was like kind of the lifeblood of founding Cenegenics as a whole, right? It's literally in the name. No, like bringing new life. I
New
believe
life,
that's
yeah.
what. So, yeah, like literally, like new life to your health span. And yeah, so I will not take credit for that, Seamus. So that was actually Rudy who said it when we tried to do, our first pilot episode of the Cenegenics podcast, and it's resonated with me ever since.
Rude is full of wisdom for sure. Yeah. Big shout out to
Well,
Rudy too.
oh yeah, well he speaks and lives it and has been doing it. I mean, just being around him, when I did have an office that was like, I'd walk over to his office and pick his brain. You could literally like people like that. If people could just be a fly on a wall for a lot of the conversations that have amongst, again, that's what this is supposed to be like amongst us. What are we talking about? What are we thinking about? Of course, you have your individual component to it, but it's really about thinking about like, what do people need to actually care about and execute versus what are they overthinking, you know? And I know you went and grabbed the paper, as we had a quick little pause, and you had a couple things you wrote down. And I think a couple of those ones are kind of right aligned with what we should go into, like data screening, ideas, things that people can get started with, right? I think that's kind of where your headspace was. So let's take it there.
So, you mentioned conventional medicine. And people talk about alternative medicine and I really, I'm not a big fan of these terms because for me, medicine is medicine. And some people call it alternative medicine because there's no abundance of data in some practices of alternative medicine. And if you go ahead,
Yeah,
you
I
want
should
to.
say the the insurance model of medicine. When I'm saying conventional, I think that's more of what I was referring to is the next time they can get in to see somebody is 6 months to a year, which is sad because maybe that's too late. So I don't mean convention, because I get what you're saying. Like, I don't view it as like this person's doing this. I feel like maybe naturopaths might be a little bit less quote unquote conventional, like outside of the traditional realm of like Western medicine. But I'm more so referring into it in terms of like the system that we have to currently go through in order to be seen. You know, that's more so what I'm meaning here versus what you're saying. Yeah, just to clarify.
So no, absolutely. So when we talk about scientific data are faulty at best, but these are the best thing we have right now. Like, if somebody can come up with a different way to study patients that's more effectively and less prone to errors than a randomized controlled trial, they'll be the most famous scientists in history. We just do not have such a great way to look at it. Now, when we look at what people call the traditional medicine, which is you're sitting at the clinic, you're seeing 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 patients per day. You have 15 minutes to see the patient. We have a couple of issues. The first one is the abundance of medical data. I looked at a study to show that I think in 1950, it took in 1900, it took something like 20 or 30 years to double the medical data. In 1950, it took something like 3 or 4 years. In 2020, it took 73 days to double the amount of medical data that we have. So you're sitting on a mountain and on the bottom of a mountain, on the summit of a mountain, and just information keeps on dropping. And it's your job or our job as a conserved medicine clinic or practice to filter through this data and answer the patients. And the patients will ask you about things they heard on the radio or Spotify or a podcast. So we have an abundance of data that we have time to analyze and stay on top of, especially that each one of us has different expertise. Like, if I have a question about something that I do not have an answer for, I can just call one of the Cenegenics partners or healthcare coaches like Rudy or you guys, and somebody's going to have an answer for it. Nobody knows everything about everything, right? So this is the first thing that sets us apart, I feel like. The other thing is, I looked at another study, and they looked at an average primary care practice, how much patients they have, how many days do they work, how many times do they see them a year, and and the time it takes for documentation. And a physician would need around 23 hours per day just to talk to the patients about the screening that needs to be done. As you know, screening is the most important thing in medicine. And for me, I beat my patients up. Like, I just drive them crazy over it. I ask them about colonoscopies every visit. I ask them about mammograms every visit. I drive them crazy until they get the screening done. So for me, as somebody who sees 2 to 3 patients per day, I can make sure that they got their screening done versus, how much time, if you have 15 minutes to take care of somebody who's hypertensive, diabetic, hyperlipidemia, and then you're not going to have time to talk to them about colon cancer screening or CT chest if they're, have, more than a certain 20 pack year smoking history or whatever. So they just don't have time. The other problem with data is that data looks at society, right? Society. So if you look at an example, let's say the testosterone level of whatever, 800 to 1,000 or 880 to 1,200. Where did this number come from? They pretty much take college students, they check their testosterone, they put them in mean and standard deviations, and these numbers, like the TSH of 0.5 to 5, is 2 standard deviations below and above the mean. So first, that doesn't take into consideration that 5% of the population is already normal, but they're away above or below the 2 standard deviations based on statistics. The other problem is that was done in Marquette University in Milwaukee. What about people who live in Colorado or Bolivia? What about sub-Saharan Africans? What about people who live in Brazil? What about Australians? Data changes from one country to another. So that's something we have to be very cognizant of. And we have patients from all over the world. So you want to look at that as well. On top of that, when you look at scientific studies, not everything is studied and a lot of things cannot be studied. So for example, the British Medical Journal submitted a study that showed that, so for example, one of the studies is does jumping from an airplane with or without a parachute increase mortality, or do they have the same mortality? And the British Medical Journal submitted a paper saying that jumping from from an airplane with or without a parachute makes no difference on mortality, and it's a real study, p-value less than 0.05, but the plane was on the ground. So this is, I mean, it was started as a joke, but it's exactly how science works. Some studies cannot be done, and even if they're done, you have to look at a lot of variables, and you have to look at what does this mean for my individual patient versus society as a whole. And that's the best thing about conservative medicine.
That, I mean, numbers lie, even though numbers don't lie. You know what I mean? Like, you can skew any data set to actually make sense and kind of be in your favor depending on what you choose, whatever the exclusion criteria ends up being. It's why, like, people were like, actually, my mom asked me and other people, like, you're not good at stats, but you're a math major. I was like, stats is like its whole other realm of thing that, of course, like, I mean, of course it's something I didn't like, because while it's supposed to be something that describes something, it's also could be massaged to be something that you want it to be, right? Like, and also too, like within, I think too, like this is part of the argument we were even having about the DEXA scan. Dr. Bugazia was like, you know, people were like, well, like, what does it actually mean? And I was like, well, no, like it's saying that it has like within whatever that standard deviation is from the same machine. If you do that measurement literally right after you did the first one, like you should have like very little error with it. But if you go to another, you know, even if it's a GE model to like look at your DEXA scan reading, it's going to be different because it's a whole different piece of equipment. It's like saying that like a study, there'd be two separate laboratories with two sets of different equipment trying to come to the same, you know, outcome or test the same hypothesis as part of the same data set. They would be two separate ones that then they would look at what their findings are. And they would then also look at what the equipment was like, because we know that human error and equipment error are like the number one and two things that people would immediately go and look at as a potential issue for a study. Right. So yeah, I mean, numbers are interesting. Numbers are important, but at the same time too, for like, you know, kind of what you're describing, like a lot of people didn't even take stats at any level of it. And again, understanding like the deviation points, again, 67% of your data is within one standard deviation. So again, like they're trying to lump in a big number as best they can with the statistical analysis, but even then it's not perfect. Like you just also mentioned with the upper limits of that too, having potentially 5% of the data pool that's outside of, was that in the third deviation or is it outside of the third? I can't remember. It's been a while since stats.
It's outside of the 2.5% and each sign
Outside
above the percent division. Yeah.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Above
That's
and
again,
below the percent deviation.
yeah. And the people that live in those outlier things, including, we'll go back to the DEXA, people that live in those outlier numbers, it becomes a little bit harder for even a machine to pick up on, you know, that person's true number, because it's not used to actually maybe even seeing and reading that person, which is something we joke about like, man, the DEXA scan really like threw me for a loop here. Like I thought I would be way leaner, or, you know, we would have, you know, and that's something that also goes to show too, like the eye test. I had a patient yesterday that has visible abs, like abs at 26% body fat. Everybody else would be like, there's no way that he's 26%. But I was like, the machine says he is. Like, so what gives? And that's, again, just a weird genetic thing, because we seldom see someone that has, again, that level of abdominal like visuals at a body fat percentage is typically over like 15%, you know, let alone over 20. It's crazy.
It's crazy. I mean, it's crazy when you start understanding like bringing health and data sets and like all the things. Like something I like to do is test like VO2, right? And my fiance has like a top percentage of VO2. But it's funny because Dr. Bugazia, you brought up ethnicity, race, and location. Well, she's in the top percentage of females of her age and gender, right? But in terms of her ethnicity, Filipino, she's actually like top 1%, maybe less than 1%. But you can only say that because there's only been a certain amount of people tested in that in that pool set. Like we need more data. And most of this data is based off of, I mean, back in the 90s, for example, the DEXA, it's like based off of a 30-year-old young, healthy adult white female. And it's like, where do we get these other races? Where do we get these other components? And it's like, it's so true that when it comes to a person's data, it's like, look, this is what it looks like, what we want, but we have to bring it back to you as the individual. We can't make these recommendations per se, in each part of the world or the country, because it's like, we don't even have the data on it yet. We may just not even have enough of a study sets or a population basis. So it's it needs to keep coming up. I love that you brought that up.
I mean, the closest we come to studying an individual is conserves medicine, but statistics by itself is, I mean, I jokingly say that statistics is racist, because statistics is all about bringing, putting everybody under the same umbrella. So just saying this group has something and this group had something. I mean, it's a joke, obviously, but if we can come up with something that's more accurate than statistics, I don't know, I'll win the Nobel Prize maybe, but it's still, nobody could establish that yet. I'm hoping one day we'll have something better. Yeah,
100%.
I live in the statistics capital of the world and expected value capital of the world, Las Vegas. So you can be very good at understanding how this thing is going to work, but guess what? Someone hits the jackpot eventually at some point. You know what I mean? There's still that small percentage still means there's a chance, and you got to give those people the hope, So
there's a Nobel Prize winning psychologist. He has a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. I'm blocking on his name.
Daniel Kahneman.
But thank you so much. So he actually showed that even people who work in Wall Street do not understand statistics. So humans.
Well, the first chapter in that book, they were saying it was a story about the horse racing and betting, right? And that they were saying that as time progressed, these horse bettors got more and more data on horses. And they were saying that they had like at least 17 data points on the horses. And once it got past 17 data points, actually their bets got worse. They were saying that the thinking fast and slow is that someone could take a look at a horse, 3 to 5 data sets, and they make their bet, and they were actually more right than wrong than when they had more time, more data, more of these things. It's kind of an interesting story, that first chapter that's talking about in that book. But yeah, anyways, go ahead, Dr. Bugazia. Sorry, but
no, that's the whole point I wanted to make about statistics. The other thing that I really wanted to touch upon is the drug development process. So when you, for example, start a supplement, let's say somebody wants to do a huge ashwagandha study, right? And some pharmaceutical company wants to sell ashwagandha as a medicine. And as you know, it's a supplement because nobody did a randomized double-controlled clinical trials and ran it through the FDA process, which takes around 12 to 20 years, and it costs something like 10 to 20 billion dollars. So who is going to? And then after that, you get a patent or whatever they call it in the drug world, and you get like an exclusivity contract where you get to be the sole seller of the drug for 10 or 20 years or something like that, so that they encourage drug inventions and drug development. So you can never patent a natural product. So there are a lot of companies now that are trying to patent psilocybin, for example. There's a company that applied for a patent to use psilocybin as a weight loss drug. And it grows in cow manure. How are you going to patent that? So that's another problem with drug development. And I get asked about supplements all the time. And it kind of relates to statistics, that just like we do not have data for everything, we do not have done the randomized control trial for every supplement or drug.
And also, too, there's probably, like we mentioned earlier, just individualistic interactions that can't be generalized, too. So someone that's like, I started taking astaxanthin, the super algae from the sea, and my God, like everything at my joints, I tan better, you know what I mean? And like those then become the purported claims of like that, superfood, right? And yet, again, like you just can't replicate it for everybody. But there are probably a small subset of people that do have something that is, beyond a placebo effect with it, right? They actually see the outcome that they're taking that thing for, which is so, like, again, or maybe it is a placebo effect. I don't know. I mean, like it's super interesting. And it actually, maybe you can answer this question. I saw this. So obviously we went through the banning of a lot of the peptides that, again, are not safe for human consumption. So whatever they said, there's not enough literature on these peptides to compound them for their purported use, right? But then I also noticed, because I went and I was like, what did it actually mean? Because I keep hearing people being able to quote unquote prescribe like BPC 157, even though it's supposed to be category 2 with regards to that classification. And then I saw like category 1 that there was actually L-theanine was in it for this category 1, meaning like they want to then, I think, create more research behind it, or like there's like a lot of promise behind L-theanine. Do you know anything about those particular like FDA regulations by chance?
So, I mean, the FDA clears some devices and supplements and drugs, just clears, because the FDA actually controls drug supplements, food, and then I think tobacco too. Interestingly, so they clear some things, but the only way they would approve something is if you apply for an IND, which is an investigational new drug development process, which you start working on animals, showing that there's no harm, and then you go through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then a new drug approval process. So nobody put these polypeptides into this arduous process that it's expensive and long, and then there's no revenue in it. So and this research pretty much will be dependent upon grants, and it's notoriously hard to get grants, especially these days. So I think this is, and I feel bad because we might be losing a lot of benefits and life-changing medicine. There's a new study now that's underway looking at metformin for longevity. I know you guys heard about metformin. People have been talking about it for a very long time. Finally, randomized controlled trials in humans. I mean, God bless whoever paid for it, because who's going to make money out of metformin? It's like 30 cents a pill. So I would love to see more of these, but it's just difficult. It's just unfortunately very logistically difficult.
Maybe someone like a Brian Johnson type that is super interested in becoming this, what is it, biologically aged, or like lowering his biological age by so much, and is independently wealthy that he can support more studies in particular compounds and peptides and things like that, would probably do it. But I think that's a very unicorn-esque person to then consider taking. Again, it'd have to be better than his blow-through rate of his own like personal expenses to be able to fund some stuff, right?
You got to find someone like him who's perfect, like who's passionate about it, doing it personally, and it has the finances to be like, okay, let's figure this out and try to share this, with everybody else. And that's a very special person, right, Marcos?
I mean, for all intents and purposes, it may have been Brian Johnson, who literally, not Liver Cream Brian Johnson, Brian Johnson, like, other one.
Don't Die.
Don't Die, Blueprint guy. But people like that, like, as much as like his marketing and advertisements kind of make me cringe sometimes, I'm actually like, you know what, that could be a more noble cause, because he is actually going to potentially be on the frontier of this investigation that we do actually need, because as you just talked about, Dr. Bugazia, like, it's an expensive endeavor to try to take something in there that's not likely going to make any money anymore for like pharmaceutical companies, right? Like, they're looking at the bottom line of like, can we then take this to market, and then are we going to recoup and actually make money on said drug, right? Versus the flip side of it. And I mean, that's literally it's our economic driver. I mean, I don't know how much pharma plays a role in terms of employment for our country, in terms of the overall finances of the country. But we also know that from a tech perspective, there's 5 major companies, and those 5 or 7 companies right now are the reason why earlier this week that Wall Street had its, tumble of whatever that percentage was. And my guy who works in finance was like, they gotta take their gains at some point. And today was the day. And he's like, you could look at it 2 ways though. You either lost a lot of money, or it's the right time to buy because everything's on sale. So
that's a good point.
So I mean, it's all about how you frame things. And I think, like you just also said earlier, like framing anything is super important. Framing the importance of screenings. Again, what are some of the screening things that you view as like very necessary for like longevity purposes? Because most of the ones I think of, like, I think skin cancer screening is like over the age of 35. So it's like Seamus and I need to think about doing that probably in the next 5 years, which is makes me feel old finally. I feel like I was just able to barely rent a car legally. And then there's like the colonoscopy, which I think they had recently moved the age down for the recommended age of that, right? In the last couple decades, I feel like. I mean, this is just me. I'm not at the age to really worry about it. So I just noticed it seemed like it was younger. Maybe that was because of the Cologuard commercials. And then obviously we have like calcium scores or CCTAs, a bunch of those things. So which ones, I mean, which ones are you super passionate about, think you get a ton of value for, and people that are listening that are maybe in those different age demographics, if we can put that, shed some light on that, I think that'd be helpful.
Absolutely. So I want to touch upon a quick note that we stopped talking about. I think is very important. That's a nice thing about having a pen and a paper, old school. So we spoke about the decline with age, right? So
Yeah.
the nice thing about what we do is that we have a lot of data about what kind of decline will happen. We know very accurately how much somebody's VO2 is going to drop in a certain amount of years. We know how much muscle mass and even bone mass somebody's going to lose. We know how much fat they're more likely going to gain, even if they maintain the same lifestyle, right? So if you have somebody who's 45 and his VO2 is, let's say, 35, and then you ask them, what are your goals in life? They're like, oh, I have kids now. One day I want to see my grandkids. I want to be able to carry them. And then you show them, you're like, look, your VO2 now is 35. It's going to drop by whatever, 3 or every decade, this amount. I don't memorize it. But you can anticipate what their VO2 and muscle mass will be, and their exercise performance will be in the future. So this is a very important point, and this is something that I see most of my patients, because just like we forget about death, we forget about aging, and if we don't talk about it every time and project what your health and fitness will be in your 70s and 80s, there's not much that we're doing.
That's a great point. And we had that. Going back to my patient yesterday, same thing, here's, that summary table of the DEXA. Here's you 5 years ago, or actually it was 7, because there was like a, COVID, 130 pounds of lean tissue. As of today, you're at 120. You think it's easy for you now being in your mid 60s to get back to 130 pounds of lean tissue? It's possible, but is it as probable as you think if you're not doing the things that you set out to do, right? That aging conversation, using data to then shed light to that. And I think you also just indirectly mentioned VO2 being a great screening tool to be able to assess things in the aging process and part of longevity as well. I'm actually in the middle of a podcast talking about VO2 things and things that actually benefit it. And he's like, well, the number one way to get good at a VO2 test, for example, is to do VO2, literally the same stepwise training, like, going up 50 watts on some sort of recumbent bike or whatever bike that we're using. You would be really good at that test and you would blow it out of the water. But the idea behind when we do it is obviously like, hey, given your training methodology of choice, are you maintaining / improving or losing your lung capacity with age, or is it your relative VO2 is making a change because you're fatter or you're holding on to more mass, which again could be unhealthy for you, So I love the idea of a VO2 as a screening tool. That's why we do it every year, right? It's an easy,
super
yeah.
powerful. Yeah.
And then one of the screening methods, like you have somebody who comes into the clinic and their VO2 is 95th centile for their age. I really do not see a reason to put them through a calcium score or a CTA or anything else, because if you're achieving this highly and your pulse index is great, your minute volume is great, your lungs are doing great, you're reaching 100% of your maximum heart rate and you're maintaining it for 30 seconds or 1 minute or 2 minutes, who am I to ask you to do a calcium score? I think it's a very, very good index.
Quick question though about that. Like, I've also heard that people that have had a lot of athletic strain and load over their years potentially have some plaquing that goes on at particular spots within the heart, and it would still be potentially worthwhile to know that. Like, if again, like the type of plaque, right? Obviously it's not indicated based on what you're saying, but would it still be worthwhile to still have that done out of curiosity?
Okay, so if you go to a cardiologist and you want to do some kind of a screening, or if you have chest pain, they'll put you in a treadmill and attach EKG monitors, or they would do a chemical stress test, which is give you a chemical that will increase your cardiac output and heart rate, and then check if you have any EKG changes, or do an echo or some other form of imaging. So pretty much that's what they're going to do in the cardiology clinic. A calcium score tells you how much calcium you have in your coronaries, right? But what does this mean? Really do not know. And I don't think it means much, because a calcified plaque is a stable plaque. The plaques that rupture and cause heart attack have no calcium. So if you want to look at the actual plaque, you can do a CTA, which is pretty much slowing the heart rate a little bit, giving you IV contrast, and then shooting a CAT scan and looking at your arteries. And now we have the Clearly test too, that analyzes the pictures with the AI, so you get a better, accurate prediction. A lot of the athletes who die either have structural heart disease that's not diagnosed, especially when it comes to arrhythmias. And that's why it's a great idea to, if you have somebody who's an athlete, to do, at least an EKG and a cardiac echo, just to make sure there's no structural heart disease that we're missing. Mitral valve prolapse is one of the common ones. Brugada syndrome, which is one of the electrical abnormalities of the heart that are genetic. And this is why it's very important to do the job, which is ask the patients. Do you have anybody who died when they were young? Young children who died? Do you have a grandparent who died at 45 or 50, or 35? Do you have, so this is why family history is very important in these cases. Coronary artery disease starts in a young age. I mean, a lot of kids who, God forbid, died in high car accidents, and they look at their coronaries, a lot of them already have plaques. So a plaque means a different thing to different patients.
Yeah. And I think that distinction too of the calcium score versus the CTA in terms of things that would be potentially again more of the athletic realm was again kind of a nice touch as well, because I mean there's so many, they all seem like kind of the same screening to me. Again, what do I know? But you explaining those differences of why that would be better, especially for people. I mean, often if this, let's just say this episode, for example, is falling in the hands or the ears of people that are generally just listening to Seamus and myself. Oh, wow, actually, I maybe would want to consider doing that because I am in my mid 30s or whatever, and having some sort of baseline at that level could be really worthwhile. And again, selfishly, I always ask these questions as we get different physicians on, because, things my parents are going through, my dad, again, from a lipid standpoint over a number of years has come about great. Fantastic, actually. Like my mom's like, how is it that your dad has a clean bill of health, yet he's also maybe one of the most unhealthy people I know? I'm like, I don't know if it's genetics, right? Then he, transparency. My dad was a heavy drinker for a number of years and his labs look perfect. Stops drinking and his labs have gone to shit. So as funny as that sounds, I'm like, maybe the cure for you was just ethanol, maybe there was some therapeutic benefits for you. And then he went and actually, just doing workups, with the cardiologist and whatnot, and got a calcium score, and it was 107. So I'm like, never was there any indication, he was, probably in the upper, 5th percentile, whatever, in terms of fitness. Always took care of himself, held on to a lot of muscle mass. His arms are still bigger than mine, which is a sore subject, but I need to put that in there. But there was none of those indicators yet that happened. And like you just said, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's at risk, because it could be, again, it's calcified, right? But then it also led to this idea of it started putting a little bit of worry into his head, right? But now at least he's not ignorant to the idea that these things, that he's going to remain unscathed for forever, right? And I think that's, sometimes ignorance is bliss. That's generally my approach at times, or at least it was. And now I'm, you're mentioning things about calcium and blood pressure and other things that could potentially be causing coronary disease, family history, all those things. It makes someone like myself really reconsider, because Dr. Bugazia, as healthy as I try to keep myself, my systolic number has chronically been high my entire adult life, as long as I've known. And it's not a white coat syndrome thing. It's I could be at home relaxing. It's just never been below the mid 120s, and chronic mild elevation. Again, is that something I should consider to get it below that 120 mark? These are questions I'm now having at 30 something years of age, because again, it may not be impacting me in my 30s, my 40s, my 50s, but when I hit 60, again, I could have maybe done something, preventative right now. So that's where I'm at. It's unfortunate, but it's because I'm around too many smart people like yourself all the time.
I feel the same. I feel the same. When it comes to screening, especially when we talk about heart disease, I mean, the ABCs, the boring things are the boring things. I call them boring
Yeah.
because they're repetitive, and I think an AI can do them, especially at the beginning, before it's time to make intricate decisions. But if you look at, maintaining somebody's blood pressure, cholesterol panel, and glucose. These are the biggest things that you start with, and then making sure they don't smoke. I mean, I was surprised by a lot of patients who have six packs and they still smoke. So it's something that we really have to talk to them about. When it comes to the cholesterol panel, I mean, the American Heart Association looks at cholesterol in the eyes of the history of the patient. So you have a patient who has, for example, if the patient is diabetic, diabetic equals coronary artery disease. So diabetic is not even a primary screening anymore. You treat them like he already has coronary artery disease. And diabetic patients do not even have chest pain, a lot of them, when they have a heart attack, because of nerve issues. So it's the ABCs of medicine. So the question that I ask myself every time a patient walks into the clinic is, if this person is to die, what would be the reason? And that's why I always talk about, accidents, seatbelts, suicide. I mean, suicide, it's been, if you look, and what a resource you can look at is that you can, look at the CDC and see the most common causes of death in every single age group. And you can have, like, within 10 years, we can have the exact age, you can have by region. There are multiple methods. But for me, I look at the 10 years of age group or cohort of these patients and what's the most common cause of them dying. And suicide is actually way up there. And how many people ask about the patient's mental health or spiritual health or emotional health, and how you're feeling? Do you think about killing yourself? Especially if they have risk factors like a family history of suicide, which I always ask about. If they have, if they live an unhappy life, if they, starts talking about things at home. Our veterans, I mean, God bless them, is just the trauma and the stress that they've been through, and they have a very, very high suicide rate. So, certain professions like dentists, anesthesiologists, physicians, have a higher, suicide rate. So it's very important to touch upon these things and ask about them too. And then we go to cancer screening. And cancer screening, as you guys said, the colonoscopy used to be 50, now it's 45. And then if it's negative, it's repeated every 10 years for males. And then the prostate, of course. These are the two most common causes of cancer. Prostate, colon, and then lung, right? And then when it comes to the ladies, you want to speak about the pap smear, and the mammograms. It's really, really, really important, in addition to the colonoscopy as well. I always ask about the eye, because glaucoma, I mean, some patients have asymptomatic increase in their intraocular pressure and they can go blind. So I check everybody make sure everybody gets an eye exam, and then skin exam, because, especially I practice in Houston. Houston was not made for people of Caucasian heritage, because they just don't have enough melatonin to protect from all of the sun. So we have a high risk for skin cancer, and it's something that I follow all the time.
Yeah, man, Dr. Bugazia, that was like a riff. That itself is like a whole podcast. You could just rip each of those parts apart. Obviously, I do want to be super respectful of your time, let you get to your day. I know we were not necessarily a hard stop, but I definitely want to make sure we are respecting that. Dr. Bugazia, I'm super excited to have you, working with you here at Cenegenics, having you run the show at Houston, and obviously grow that practice and grow those things. Let me ask you this, though. Any final things you'd love to share to the audience, kind of just about longevity, health span, anything that they should just kind of leave off with at the end of our conversation here?
Thank you. Yes, thank you for giving me the chance. So I would like to really reiterate, and I know I really said that, but how little emphasis we give to mental and emotional health. I know it's been kind of in the news recently. People talk about it a lot, but I don't feel like we are still talking about it enough. I really have some thoughts about how society is structured, especially. People talk about, for example, Mediterranean diet all the time, right? I grew up in the Mediterranean. I think the Mediterranean diet is great, but I think the Mediterranean lifestyle is greater, right? We look at these Greek islands after the austerity measures that they implemented in Greece. And instantly, once they started working more, some islands they took away their afternoon naps. Their mortality shot up like instantly. So you go walk down the streets of Paris, everybody smokes like a chimney. But French people live longer than we live in the United States. So there are a lot of things that we have to explore. Our diet, how processed it is. I mean, I know this is not terribly objective, but I would go to Tunisia, for example, right? And I spent a few days there, and or Turkey, and I would eat tons of. It's like my off time, right? Like I splurge. I go on through these carbs, and I come back and I do my DEXA or weight and weigh myself, and I don't see any change. Versus here, you go to Cheesecake Factory twice and you gain 10 pounds, right? So I think the processing of food in the United States, our
Yeah.
social life, the isolation. I mean, the social isolation is an epidemic in the United States,
Oh
especially
yeah.
when it comes to old and young men. I saw a study that something like 60 to 70% of 30-year-olds are single. Some of them have not had a romantic relationship for years, 1 or 2 years. How do you think this person is going to age? Are we talking about optimism in life? Are we talking about having a goal? Are we talking about spending time outdoors, walking, gardening? How do you deal with stress? How much do you work? How much do you love your job? What's your purpose in life? So these are things that I talk about to every patient. They're very important for me. They're as important
Yeah.
as everything else. Cortisol level, right? Like our bodies love acute stress, cold plunging, high intensity. Bodies love that. But the body hates chronic elevation of cortisol. I promise you, like I can look at somebody down the street, I'm like, you look like you have very high cortisol. You just need to chill. So we have to ask about life. How is it outside of work? Okay? I can
Yeah.
tell you, like people in Italy or France, when they go sit for lunch, they have a bottle of wine, they have 6 or 7 courses, and they sit around their lunch table for 3 hours. I haven't had lunch in 2 years, so I just don't know. Like it's we have to ask about these things. And the final
Like
thought
yeah.
that I have, do you want to make any comment about this before I go to my final thought?
Yeah, I the that like you just said, studying more about like the social factors of health and how that's obviously relating to it is such an interesting one. And then like the processing of the foods, and again like that nap. I mean, we should definitely bring a siesta into the American workday. I don't know
I'm
how we
telling
can
you,
get that passed
Marcos,
as legislation. I'm so for it.
every time I bring this up, the moment that Spain took the nap out of their national like thing back in 2017, I was like, that's the beginning of the downfall of human society, and it's been a downfall since. They need to bring it back. Bring back the nap.
Guys, I have patients who are highly achieving, extremely successful. They work out twice a day. They wake up at 5. They have multiple jobs. They run multi-million-dollar companies. And then they're like, but at like early afternoon, I'm tired. I'm like, of course you're tired. It's just like you're doing some superhuman work. Your brain and body are probably spending a lot of energy. What's wrong with a
Yeah.
20-minute nap? I do some night work still. And one of the things that I read is that a 20-minute to 30-minute nap at nighttime really improves outcomes, concentration.
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about sleep. I mean, sleep is just. I mean, as you know, I was.
That'll have to be a part two for sure.
Part two,
Absolutely.
we've always said this, is that especially with, it's easier to keep grabbing people such as yourself out of our organization to have these conversations, but that's the idea, is like, okay, where this one's mostly the introduction phase. Like we want people to get to know you, right? And then the next one is like more into like the things that you're super passionate about. And that's where the first step of anybody making that like health journey is like really resonating with the physician, and just also like building a rapport before they've even met you, and so like you talking so eloquently about everything and like the way that you want to approach this very complex problem, but you're talking about the ABCs, like again, that could be your thing, right? And people will be like, I want you as my physician because of how you articulated that here today, which is fantastic. But yes, the sleep, we'll try to pinpoint those ones for the, we'll make a list of it, which doctor wants to tackle which one because they're passionate about it, and that way it's like a more guided conversation, and we come prepared with better questions, because selfishly the first episode's us just getting to know the physicians better, right, Seamus?
Yeah, gonna hang out a little bit.
Yeah.
No, I would love to talk sleep neuroscience, and I would love to talk psychedelics too, if you guys are interested in
Sleep
that. It's
neuroscience and psychedelics. Ooh,
There it
that's
is.
yeah,
sign us up.
yeah.
But
I
you
think
have one more point, and then we'll wrap it up here.
that's the thing.
You're
I was gonna talk about, and I have to write things down. Old school. So yes, and that's one of the things I wanted quickly to discuss is the evolving science of psychedelics, and I'm one of the believers in the potential of these drugs if used appropriately. I think they will
Yeah.
make a huge impact, especially in the mental health and
Yeah.
addiction in the United States.
Yeah.
Just to give you a 5 second tease, recently there was a phase 3 trial of treating PTSD with MDMA, which is ecstasy or Molly, with psychotherapy. So 3 doses of MDMA with psychotherapy for veterans who came from Vietnam, from Iraq and Afghanistan with PTSD. And this study showed that it's a big study. And the study showed that 68% had zero symptoms of PTSD by 6 months. So MDMA is now submitted for approval by the FDA. Unfortunately, the initial panel was concerned and they wanted more studies. But I think there will be a lot of these medications that will be that will pass the FDA's filter, and I think they will be approved. And I have a lot of. I'm very optimistic.
With that, would it be like assisted treatment with it? Like you have to be in like a psychotherapy setting to then administer said medication?
Absolutely, all outpatient. Nothing includes admission, but there's definitely a lot of monitoring, a lot of psychotherapy. It's my passion. I started a master's degree in that. I love the idea. And we will talk about, the addiction network, especially the default mode network. This is another passion of mine.
This is gonna be so cool.
Yeah. So it's something that I would love to discuss.
Have to do it.
We totally will. And Seamus, I mean, man, we knew this was going to be so fun, but like, again, I know we definitely wanted to, again, like I said, really illustrate and show people who you are, give that introduction. If there's a snippet in here that ends up being, on the site where they see you and things that you've talked about just in casual conversation, of course, I feel like patients will truly resonate you. And this has helped me significantly understand like your passion pieces in addition to, and then on the next one, we'll talk with Kara, and you mentioned being around good people to help you with you got one of the best,
coordinators.
What are they even called? I think they're patient experience coordinator, right? Or patient experience persons. Like, I mean, she is so on the ball and helping us set this up. And I know that it took us a little time to, make sure all of our schedules were available because we had people coming into our clinics. And, but thanks for being flexible. We just wanted to express our gratitude for that as well.
Of course, guys, it's an honor. Appreciate you. There's in Houston, there's a new physician, hopefully starting soon. His name is Dr. Faraj. I think you guys should have a sit down with him as well at some point. He's still in the orientation process, but he is one of the smartest old school physicians. He's the guy who would like listen and tap and like really one of the smartest diagnosticians I've ever met. I think you guys should meet him. Very old school, very, very smart. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let me close this out here real quick, guys. This is the power of longevity right here. The people, the physicians like Dr. Bugazia, the depth of knowledge that they have, the amount of data they have to go through to help you have an individualized, comprehensive thing. And the technology is still cutting edge and we're still learning. The curiosity is still there. But also at the same time, Dr. Bugazia is a human. He has his own, things he's curious about, things he wants to go after, doing his own masters. And I think that's what, Cenegenics is all about, people pushing the narrative and not just waiting for something to happen. We're being proactive and being, next level. So with that being said, please guys, like, comment, and share this episode, particularly super high level conversation, but it was only one part of a longer conversation. Thank you again, Dr. Bugazia, for being part of our Cenegenics guest series.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.